start at the beginning, David, which is probably the best place to start. You were born in Huddersfield in 1932, and I believe that this morning you've been to look at the house on Victory Avenue where you were born.
Yes, well, I was born there, but only there for 6 weeks, just in time to be registered on a birth certificate. And then my little family moved away. I then went to places like Coventry and Northamptonshire, where there was relations to stay with. This, I've been back to Yorkshire once or twice. Once, the first time to really go to Haworth and look all around the district, because when I was about 20, I had to do illustrations for Wuthering Heights. So I naturally had to know the spirit of the place, you know. And I do think it's very beautiful. When Richard and I were driving up, it was awful coming through the Midlands where I lived. It was very black. But Richard knows, as we got here, the air seemed to change, the spirit of looking at things. I mean, even the way fields are divided and everything, it's nice.
But your family background, David, I'm sure people would be interested to know about that. I mean, I think you were from quite humble working class origins. Can you just say something a bit about your family background?
My mother was from the district, farmer's daughter. My father was from Northamptonshire, originally a shoemaker. That's really all there was to it. On my birth certificate, they both landed in Huddersfield, and at the time that I was to be born, and they hadn't got work. And on my birth certificate, it said that they were both vacuum cleaner salesmen.
Right. Okay. But in terms of your career and your development as an artist, I think I'm right in saying that there's no history of art in the family, no particular interest in art.
Oh no.
So can you say something about how that came to develop in you, this interest in
yes,
becoming an artist?
I mean, when the war started, I was just kind of about 9 or 10 years old. My family was very, very split up. My mother and father were never married, and I went from this part to that part to live. And I had literally no education at all. I mean, I could hardly read at 10 years old. I joined the Boy Scouts. They taught me to cook, to read, helped me to draw, and I found my interest through that. And then because of having nothing to say at home, and being expected to possibly go and work in the motor car factories in Coventry, I realized I had to do something for myself. And I discovered painting, going to the libraries. You've got to remember that libraries at that time was very poor selection of art books, very, very poor. And they were always in black and white or something. And they never got beyond the Laughing Cavalier and things, which is beautiful, but that's about it. Nevertheless, I like the way people looked in those paintings. They looked an awful lot nicer than the people around with the war beginning, with the tragedy of how it affected everybody in factories. I mean, women were working, making ammunitions, and everything was crazy. So it was something to really steep myself into. But by the time my mother realised I was interested in that, she was very disappointed. She said, "But I always wanted you to be a doctor." I said, "Well, Mum, I would have needed an education." You can educate yourself a long way in art if you're interested.
Well, it'd be good to talk about your education in art, because I know, having talked with you before when we were preparing this exhibition, you did persuade your mother to let you go to the junior art school in Coventry.
Oh no, I didn't have to persuade my mother. There was nothing else I could do with me because one, I had an examination from the ordinary school in Coventry for the art school, and I got in by this. I had to write an essay about something, I can't remember what it was, as part of the general education, because it was what they called a municipal art school. This was half art, half general subjects. Again, I mean, there were people who hadn't gone into the services, and some of them went rather unpleasant in those days as a background teacher. So I went when I was 13 to art school, 13 and a half to be exact. By the time I was 14, I'd had enough of it. The general education really got me down because it was a case of having had no education of being ridiculed. So my attitude was get out and try and make your living by art in some sort of way. So literally on my birthday I left art school at 14. So I'd been here 6 months and I got a job in a commercial art studio. I picked things up quickly, you know, and it was a life for me. There was a relationship, there was a feedback in something. And this developed very quickly because at 14, by the time I was 16, I went to work in the theatre in Birmingham for a kind of musical thing, and Emily Lickler to paint scenery. It was great, just working with people. I met a man called Edward Delaney, who was a very important scenic artist in that time. I was chosen to be his assistant when he came to work in Birmingham on a special show. The man never spoke, he just looked at me and called me guns. And he didn't paint scenery on the walls like everybody does with electric and bridge. Everything's on the floor, continental there. So he mixed up a pot of paint with his. He looked at it, gave me the brush, and just made a sign for me to go and find the intelligent part to do, which is a bit of a mistake. But I found he was very pleased with it. He picked me up. He worked on this set for a fortnight, and then one day he did speak. He said, if you ever come to London and you want a job, come and see me. Well, I was 16 when I started, and then I didn't try to get the national service as we wanted to do, but I was graded out of that. At 18, I had to stay in Coventry for this. And then I went to London at 19, when I was 19. And my first thing was to go to see Edward Delaney. I walked to a studio and he came out, not a word. And I said, do you remember me? And he just nodded. And I said, well, you did say if ever I needed some work, to come and see you. So at the same side, took me in the studio, a pot of paint, and sent me to it. So that really was my education in drawing, and painting, and working in scale. I think it was a very good education because it immediately introduced me to space and the magic of making images. It was very important, and one thing led to another, and then I don't know how, I was meeting John and Freud and Bacon and everybody, and it all escalated very quickly.
Well, I want to ask you about that because, as you said, you were in London, you were 19, I think it was August 51 when you were around.
51, yeah.
Yeah. And again, when we talked last year, when I came to you in Italy, you told me about meeting Florence, and I think you went to a sketch club presentation at St Martin's, and you were very impressed by him. And you said you thought he was the absolute star in terms of artists working at that time.
Yeah.
And can you tell us why you felt he was the absolute
Well,
star?
again, when I was in Birmingham in Coventry, I would see that old-fashioned magazine called Everybody's, which not many people here would remember. But there would be articles on Johnny and Lucien and all these things. He was amazing, the things he said, you know, the way he responded to interviews, the way he responded to students. And he was the kind of bright light, he was a star amongst people. And I had some friends who were students at St Martin's. Remember, I was working in senior commercial art while they were at school. But they said, Johnny Minton's coming to give a talk on students' work. And it was a stage show all its own. I don't know how many of you know Joe Tilson's work, who is also a friend. And Johnny was going round and he got to this painting, awful painting. It was one of Joe's. He said, why did you paint on this side of the hardboard? And Joe said, well, because I'd already painted on the other side. So Johnny flashed the painting out to the other side. Oh God, yes, it's even worse. There was humour there, and directness, you know, of spirit, and there were other interesting things that he said. I got in touch with him. In those days, you could look down a telephone directory and you could find somebody's name. You know. It wasn't like today, computer research. And I just said I'd been to that and I was having a little show myself, which had the painting, a little early self-portrait, very stylized, slightly Freudian and Freudian. And I said, I wondered if you could dare to come and see it. Oh, he was there like a shot, you see. He wanted to buy it, you see. And Freud was there. Freud wanted to buy it. But he said, no, I think we let Johnny have it, because Johnny has a passion for you, isn't it? So anyway, we went back to John's place. He gave me a beautiful drawing, choice of all his drawings. And there was a picture which was very famous at the time, called The Death of Nelson, with all the floorboards going straight out. And he looked at me, looking at me, he said, I know what you're thinking. He said that all the floorboards are out of perspective. I didn't say that. He said, well, I know you do, and everybody else thinks that. But it's too late to change them. It was a very human, you know. He puts the whole thing up on a very, very immediate human level.
Of course, there's a John Minton show at Pallant House in June, Pallant House in Chichester, and we're going to see it.
Oh yeah.
Perhaps you'll make it long.
So well, the drawing here that you have was done just before that painting.
Right.
And that was actually on my 20th birthday.
Right.
That was a present.
This is a pencil drawing which is in one of the trees you have seen. But through Minton you also, I mean, you mentioned Lucien Freud, who I think you bumped into a wee bit before you met John.
Well, Freud was really, I mean, I'm very fond of him, I mean, a big stuff, but Freud on a much more spiritual level.
Right,
was
yeah.
a tremendous help to me.
Yes.
I mean, I was living in some pretty bad conditions in Paddington, and Lucien got me into a top room flat in the Portobello Road, you know, because he knew the people there.
Yeah.
He took great care to see that I was okay.
Yeah.
Money, Lucien for money, no. Lucien would borrow money off you, but you would never borrow from him. But Johnny was the one who was handing out evidence to Lucien and everybody. I mean, it's ironical that it was just at that time that there's a famous portrait of Freud of Minton, the long-faced, very beautiful, which Lucien was making while Johnny Minton was doing the portrait of me. It's in Allen House.
Yes.
They coincided. But I mean, that painting now is into millions, you know, to buy.
Of course.
Johnny Minton bought it from Lucien for £250. And when Johnny died, left it to the Royal College of Art.
Through Freud and Minton, you met other artists working in London at the time. John Praxton, Keith Vaughan, Francis Bacon, Fenella Club, all somewhat older than you, 20 or more years.
The one thing I find, and I mean, I would like to be with young people now. I did try when I was in teaching, but is that they were naturally kind. I mean, when Freud had got me this place in Portobello Road, the deal was with the landlady who let me have that. But on Saturday, I worked in the cafe below and washed up and took out the egg and chips, you know, to people like Christie, who you might remember. And one Saturday when I was there like that, Mrs. MacDonald come in, she said, "You better have your lunch now and take your egg and chips out." She said, because it was Johnny Minton and Lucien Freud and Francis Bacon want you to eat with him. Now, I mean, what painter that I know of today would even go to a place like that in Portobello Road and take on a young man and just talk, just as equals? You know.
Yeah.
This was what was remarkable. I went there just at the right time, just the right people who have, in spirit, influenced me for the whole of my life.
Yes, I'm sure. Yeah. Let's move on and talk about your painting. I think amongst the earliest paintings in the show, well, there are two small oil studies in one of the vitrines made when you were very young. But in terms of the first, maybe professional paintings, there are two from 1954. There's a mother and child, which is a picture of your first wife with your son John when he was just born. And then there's a picture of a broken eggshell on a plate. And they're very kind of detailed paintings. Can you say something about those paintings, about maybe what influenced them, what influenced your thinking in terms of that kind of stylistic and technical approach?
Well, because of what was going on at the time with people, Minton, I mean, it was a very intense time. Nobody was particularly pleased with me that I was going off at just before I was 21, getting married to a girl that I was very much in love with, you know, and neither were the family. But it just was an intense thing. And I don't know if you're a painter, what else do you expect to do but try to be intense in the painting? I mean, the painting of the baby's head, in my own way, I can admit now, without feeling embarrassed by saying this to you, that I had to try and do the best painting in the world of the mother and child, as far as I could see, you know. And in spirit, to paint the cracked egg, it was a symbol, which was like to symbolize the world for me, opening. They're paintings that I still own, so I've got. Do it. That's all I can say about it. But I mean, again, Freud was around a lot, and he saw those. And when he saw the baby's head, he said, "You must never, never, never part with that." You know. Well, that coming from a guy as good as that,
Yes.
is pretty remarkable.
Yeah. And then moving on, in terms of the development of your work, with those very detailed early paintings, very intense, as you say, and then we move on in terms of the exhibition here to some landscapes. There's one titled Paddington, and there are two of Brighton Beach, where the treatment is altogether different. There's more thickness and impasto to the paint. It's a bit more gestural quality to it. How did that transition happen, David?
Well, I'm going to say something that I've never thought before, and I have two sons sitting over there. So they might never speak to me again. But first of all, I was remarried. I was married to a woman who was, I say this in respect, far too ambitious for her own good, really, you know, in spirit, you know. And she was Scottish, and as both Sean and Robert know, I mean, she doesn't say paint, she says paint, you see. And she was always talking about paint and the new system of things, the way William Scott and Roger Hill and the abstract expression. She would indeed really rather I'd worked like that. But again, I'd soaked myself in imagery, so I had to adapt my imagery to the paint. And I think the Paddington one for me is, if I can have any favourites, that's one of my favourite paintings, because it's one of the place where I lived with an intense relationship with friends and my family. It also says a lot to me about the aftermath of Coventry and the bombing of the war, the memories, because it's all being brought to the ground. You know. But again, I'd said to Rob before, I won't talk about the life of the dodgy life of the painting itself afterwards, but you change, you live through different experiences, and as that was being left, my whole lifestyle was changing, and it wasn't long before I was into my third and final marriage, which made a very big gap between that sort of work. But again, brought back the intensity of, I mean, we were beginning a family, of John, the portrait, down there, the big portrait, who came to sit with us, you know, when we were in the chapel where I worked. And the whole thing was reforming itself all the time. I mean, I don't think a lot of people realise that for a lot of painters who really work at it, the whole of their emotional lives, their social lives, their social commitments into teaching changes you all the time. I mean, you're not an actor, but I remember a student saying to me, "Why do you paint leather jackets?" I said, "Because they're skin. They're my skin." And I see chairs as being places where a lot of children are almost born in chairs, you know, mother before she goes off. So there's been a lot of subjective feeling that's gone into these things.
That's been picked up on critically over the years, though, hasn't it? That thing about how objects, interiors, landscapes are imbued with a sense of human presence and absence. So, I mean, Rachel Cook, I think, in that wonderful review in The Observer / Guardian, picked up on that. And I think that's one of the qualities in the work, really, that it is kind of imbued with that. It's a form of autobiography, I think, really.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. And you mentioned the painting of John, which is the very beautiful portrait just to the left of the second doorway here. Now, I think that's one of the first things you did in tempera, having previously worked predominantly in oil paint.
Yes.
And of course, you became very renowned and remain renowned as an artist in tempera. So,
it's a bit of a nuisance.
Yeah, I can imagine. But can you tell us something about that, again, that transition to using that media? What impelled you to begin to work with that process, which of course is quite intensive? And
well, I'm going to bring Freud into this again. I mean, it has been said, and I've had to kind of say to people that it isn't, that Freud's portrait of John Minton was temperate. It is not. Lucien would never even crack an egg to eat, let alone paint. And I saw the painting being painted with oil paints, I know. But to me, Freud, why I bring this up about Freud, because Freud said to someone once, the trouble with David is he tries so hard not to be successful. He will always go the opposite way to do things. And I could understand that. I mean, what could have been more unfashionable than painting in egg tempera when I started doing it? But it was something that I learned from being a scene painter, because size paint and dry colour is much the same in a way. In some ways, size paint is nicer because as you're working, because of the actual size, you can take a sponge with a warm cloth, wipe it away. You can't do that with tempera. You scrape it away with razor blade. Tedious. But, I liked the colour. I'd also discovered something which is, to this day, extraordinary to me. When I lived in the chapel, there were oil paintings, acrylics, watercolours, gouaches, much the same as all that. And there were temperas. And when the lights went out on one occasion, we couldn't see anything. I went round with a candle to look. And you know, oil paintings just glowed a little bit. Acrylics was just a mess of plastic kind of reflection. Gouache wasn't so bad, but tempera painting took the whole thing, the light that came through it. So I have a great trust in tempera. I stopped painting in tempera for something like 6 or 7 years now, because of having an operation on my right hand, and it was much too heavy loaded to do this. But I've made a vow to myself, no matter how difficult it is, I'm going back to doing that tempera painting, because I just love the way the colour sits. You have to almost work graphically. If you want it to look like grass, you have to paint grass, you know. You can't just kind of, with oil paint, you just skid it up a bit on the side, you know, and then turn it into things. I like the idea of having to really work for that particular texture.
Just going back to tempera though, and your interest in tempera, I think also it stemmed in part, at least, from looking at frescoes, both the Roman frescoes from Pompeii and some in Florence,
Yes.
by Masaccio and Massey. Can you say something about how you felt when you first visited those frescoes and how?
Well, this is why I went to live in Italy. I mean, because as far as I'm concerned, the best art in the world is the Roman art in Pompeii, on the walls. And we're very lucky to have it excavated and to be able to see it. I like not only that, but the fact, the domestic quality and selection of subject. I mean, they weren't trying to be, if you like, pornographic or erotic when they were painting their scenes. That was just the way they lived, you know. If they had a fishmonger's shop, there was a fish painted over the top of it. Everything was direct in choice of imagery. It means that, I do regret not being in Italy for the last days, you know, of life. But that's what I've found. And we're going to see the frescoes in Florence with the Masaccios and Massolinos and so on. Was an incredible experience, and it's a very small chapel. It's nowhere near as big as this room. It's narrower than this, and probably not as long as this. But you've got 3 artists painting major subjects and frescoes. Now, when I went there first, there was not many people in there. I went at a time when there wasn't hardly anybody there. but I was with someone and I said, do you know, I can hear the pots of paint, people mixing colours and doing this. Because of being a scene painter in those days, I was aware of the nature of painting this, and it made me feel as though I was in the presence. Not that I would have been good enough to be the worst assistant in that subject, but that it's an emotional, on an emotional level. Once I work in tempera, if you're in for a tree, it's got to be a tree. If it's a jacket, it's a jacket. You can't just skip around. With oil paint, you can do anything. You can slide on it if you want. But I mean, no, I do use oil paint still, but it is a bit of a performance. You know, you realise you're being drawn into this perverse kind of thing.
But people here won't necessarily know about the process of working with tempera. Can you just tell us something about the nuts and bolts of the method, the technique? How does one go about making, because I know you make your own paints and so on, can you describe that to us?
Well, it's such a broad thing. I mean, people always are writing about it. It's all little crosshatches, and he's so skilled at doing all this. Is all rubbish, really, honestly. I mean, people say in the press unbelievable things. But I was talking to Richard as we were driving up about having made a film of making colour tempera paintings, and, which I didn't really want to do, and it cost me a hell of a lot of time. For about the best part of a year, I was going all around giving lectures and demonstrations in schools for this. And I was, at one point, invited to go to Birmingham. Now, I knew what the young Birmingham student would be like, you know, a bit rough and ready to say the least of it. And they were thinking, I thought, oh, the silly old fool coming to show us all these crosshatches and things. A lot of feet on the table and all that kind of thing. So the college said, well, what do you want? I said, well, I want all these dry colours. I want a big roll of newsprint, white paper, and I want several buckets and a lot of water, and I want 24 eggs. Okay, so we start, and they all look bored as hell. And I said, well, I'm now going to really explain the nature of tempera painting, what it is really like. So they all looked, and I took some powder colour and I put it in a bucket, and I stirred it round with water. And I put half a dozen eggs, shells on the lot, and pounded them all upside down. And they all kind of looking what's going on. And then I said, well, now I'll demonstrate some of its properties. And I threw it along the line, the bucket, with all the paint splashing. I said, now there, you've got the shells, you've got the paint, you've got the water, you've got a process, and that is permanent. I said, you won't even be able to, after a couple of days, take the eggshells off. They'll all be stuck there, part of it. So you can do anything with this. You don't have to do traditional kind of ideas of tempera books and all that. I mean, people writing the most awful kind of drool about it. All it is you have your dry colour, which you mix into a paste, a thick paste with water. Then you decide where you're going to work and how much egg. So proportionately with, we'll say, half that glass of this mixture, you would put quite a lot of water with it, and you just float it on. It does all the work for you. You either have small brushes or big brushes or sponges or just what you like, or you pour it on out of a can if you want. I'm amazed that not many abstract artists have used it, because it would lend itself beautifully. Its colour, its texture, the possibilities. I mean, all right, so you put acrylic oil on, and say you wanted to scratch that out in a strip right the way down. You can't do it. With Intemperate, you just take a blade and you just scrape it off. I mean, there's a lot of facility, it offers a lot of open thinking, really, to use.
Will it not leave a stain in there when you scrape that off?
Yeah, I mean, well, if you've got, say you painted this table of a blue and you want to get back to the white of the gesso, you just take a razor blade and you just scrape it off, and it goes. Or if you wanted to be some kind of fanatic who wanted to do something like a scrapeable technique, you could take a scalpel and you could draw hair, lines, and anything. And you could put a wash over this, and it would take a thin colour and go into the lines. It is so versatile.
I think you generally, from what I read, is you put off tempera because it seems to be such a fussy medium to work with, or that's the impression you get when I read about it. I've worked in acrylics, but never tempera because I've just been too scared to go in.
Oh, well, I think anybody who has the slightest interest in tempera should just get a few dry colours and a couple of eggs and get on with it.
That flexibility.
Sorry.
Quick questions a bit
Just
later.
One.
Oh, yes, please go ahead.
Only in relation to what was just said. Do you think it's possible that artists have avoided tempera because they don't feel their draftsmanship's up to it? Do you think it's possible that artists have avoided tempera because they don't feel their draftsmanship's up to it? It would dry too quickly.
Well, I mean, again, when you think of that flexibility of scraping, of drawing lines, fine brushes, if you like. I mean, I have so many brushes. When I work in tempera, it's a field day. You can have great long brushes. You can do anything. To actually draw is such a sensation. I mean, I used to get accused of being rather like Andrew Wyeth. Well, I have a great admiration for the skill of that man doing it. I'm not very interested in the subjectivity of it at all, but the man has skill, a lot of skill. But again, he was regarded as a bit of a kind of eccentric, or it still is in America, regarded as an eccentric. People, I have to be honest with it, probably because I can speak up for myself. I never found too many people directly accusing to me.
Perhaps we could just go on, David, and talk about, clearly there is a fascination with process, as is evident here, and I think people are always highly interested in the kind of demystification, if you like, of an artist's process, because so often they walk into a gallery, they see the end product on the wall, framed, and that's your lot. One of the pleasures of this exhibition is that actually we've got some of your sketchbooks in the display vitrines and one or two working studies. I wonder if maybe you could say something about the process. You probably have different approaches to paint, to that arrival at the final painting, but could you just say something about maybe working in sketch form, drawing for a painting, formulating ideas? How does that tend, or how has that tended to happen for you?
Well, I might have been able to answer that in quite a different way 10 or 15 years ago, 15 or maybe 20. But now, even having said the worst things on earth about oil paint and acrylic, when I use either acrylic or oil paint, I try to use it exactly the same as I did with tempera. And Richard doesn't always know the difference. It's a question of having the interest. First of all, it's a question of what are you going to do? Why are you doing it? Why are you sitting there wanting to work? I mean, I have a new place, a room I kind of live in, and a nice little studio at the back of that. And once I can get into the studio at the back, I'm perfectly all right. Run like a wild neurotic in the front room, because I don't know what the hell I'm going to paint. And it's a question of almost tying yourself down, and at the end of the day, starting to draw, really, more than anything, to draw your image. And not being at all scared of doing the most awful drawing. In fact, recently I found it is better to start with the worst thing possible. You can at least get out of that, you know.
How can I just ask you how the looker little studies of dummies with dresses and things in these, obviously in these sort of shadowy back streets, knowing looker, that you found, they look like they were from the 1920s or something. I mean, very ethereal. And yet if you go back to the vitrines that are here, you've got a photograph taken in London in 1959, which has got that same imagery. I mean, that was just amazing to see that photograph that you'd taken in 1959, then to see you returning to that sort of ethereal imagery in so much more recently, in 2000 plus. Were those the beginnings of, obviously, of paintings that then evolved, like the figure on the table and so on?
I think the photograph of the shop in Kentish Town, which
That's what I mean.
yeah, which I know when I went out to see David in Italy last September, when I alighted on that photograph in his private archive, I just thought it was incredibly important as a kind of way of, I'm answering the question for you, David.
No, that's good.
I'll let you get to work. But I think there is this wonderful and intriguing play on spatial ambiguity, reflection, this kind of theatricality. I mean, it strikes me that experience of working in theatre, which you've described, must have been quite profound, not only in terms of the technical capacity, but just that whole thing of working in theatre, which is itself a construct, you know, this kind of parallel to making a painting. And I think, you know, there's often kind of frames within frames. We see draped easels forming pictures within pictures. We see reflections in mirrors and windows and so on. And then, yes, the very beautiful series of Luca gouaches. I think they're gouache, David. Yeah. And how they are a development out of that early interest. But maybe now I'll let you say something about that, because is there something you can say
I'd like
about
to say
that
something
whole
about this thing of photography. I mean, when I was younger, I was absolutely scared stiff of the idea that was I having to use photographs to help me to do this. Because of the selection. The truth of it was, in retrospect, when I look, I perhaps hadn't got the materials always to paint the scene. And certainly if I was walking through Kentish Town, I wasn't carrying a lot of tempera gear down the road with me, you know. The camera was available, but when I did take a photograph of something, I tried to do a painting of the photograph. Maybe that's wrong, I don't know, but I did think like that. And I think the one you particularly, there is actually a series of paintings around that one, which are very like that. But I remember that was before the tempera, that was.
Yes.
And I remember painting that with the canvas on the floor a lot, and I would use very broad paint and a sift, like you have flour going through, sifting the marble dust all over the painting, brushing it dry into the paint, working into that with other strokes. Keep on and on and on, kind of putting the marble dust, building up this. This wasn't to make necessarily a texture, it was to offer me alternatives in the appearance of the image, which is quite a different thing. And as I've got older, I mean, when I was young, I was scared of not being brilliant. You know, I wanted. It would have been lovely to have been as gifted as Picasso to draw like that. You know? And you were embarrassed not to be as good as that. And you always felt people expected you to try and do this wonderful sort of thing. And as I've got older, I now realise that was absolutely wrong. And I doubt whether Picasso felt that himself, although when they said to him, everybody says you can draw as good as Raphael, he said, probably better. I mean, you know, something has to be said. But I feel now the great thing is really to make, and how much do we know really about Picasso working? I mean, the secrecy of it. I mean, I know that he went to America to meet people like de Kooning, because they were good, you know. And Picasso wanted to be the best. He always did. I mean, he only went there to see how they were doing it, whether he could do it. When he came back, strangely, the pictures looked very like de Kooning, you know. But he could carry this sort of thing. That's probably half the makeup of an artist, is to be kind of an actor and an interpreter. To, I mean, like what scene painting did teach me was that I got to do it quickly. You've got to be right at the end of the day, or I'd get the sack. You know, so you had to work, and if you were working with somebody. Some of the scene painters could only do kind of paint bits of mouldings, and they said to me, "Do you think we could do the figures?" And you just did them. You know? It was a challenge. I remember one commercial art firm bringing up the idea of this working and doing things. There was an Orson Welles film of, I think, was it called Man on the Run? There's this. They wanted for the cinema in New Street, this great big wall piece of this man on the run. And they showed me a little photograph of this, and they showed it to the senior member of the thing. And he said, "Oh, I can't do that." So the boss said, "Did he?" I said, "Yeah, I think I can do it," which was annoying, you know, in terms of it. But yes, I just looked at this and did it. It was a kind of a flow of power, if you like, from yourself, an energy that you have to reach out. You've got to make it, you know, or you'll get the sack at the end of that. This is one of the things about starting work at 14, the responsibility that's put on you. If you're no good, you'll be out before the end of the week. Does that explain anything?
I think it explains a lot. Yeah. We've been talking for over 45 minutes, which has been great.
So I can dip this in my water.
So perhaps you wet your whistle, David, and we'll see if there are further questions from the audience.
David, you haven't mentioned your time teaching, I think, at the Reformed School of Art and the Western School of Art.
I didn't hear that then.
It's about teaching. The question about teaching at the Ruskin.
What I came to ask was, what impact did it have on you? Because clearly it must have had a huge impact on the students that you taught.
Well, first, in just a couple of seconds, I'll say why I went into teaching. I didn't want to. I didn't need to. I was making money. But my family relationships needed a bit of company, and it was the best way of getting them down to the house when we lived in the country. Some young students come and stay the weekend. So I was really forced into this as a kind of a social thing to create a different kind of life. Unfortunately, I'm not saying this praising myself, but unfortunately, it seemed I was good at it. You know. And I honestly resent that, really, because the last thing a painter wants to be is a good teacher.
Well, many are though, aren't they? And I'm glad you raised that point about the teaching, because you did have a substantial teaching career.
Yeah, well,
at a
then
number of
I
institutions,
went
didn't
to
you?
Royal College, and that was lovely, because you were just let to have a kind of relationship with the students and what they were doing, and that was wonderful. But then for health reasons, I had to retire after 13 years, and then eventually I got the job at Oxford. Now, I set the rules at Oxford if I was going to do this, and this was my own fault. Again, there was a social domestic problem that wanted to push me out of the house. And just 3 days before they were choosing the person, I'd received a letter to ask me to write a reference. And I was very irritated, and I said to my wife, well, look at this now. I could get out of all this. I could leave home. I could go and work there. See? And she said, you wouldn't dare. See? Now this is true and about my attitude towards teaching. So I said, well, just watch this. And I phoned up Oxford and I said, I've got this, but I'd like to apply for the job myself. They said, please do. I arrived, and there were 3 candidates, and I went in for my turn. I mean, again, a challenge to an artist. The secretary came out and he said, when you go in, he said, you'll see a big oval table with all the dons and the chancellor at the head. He said, and, the chancellor will make a sign for you to sit down. This is all very surreal, he said. And my personality wouldn't let that go. Anyway, I got in and they were looking like this. So I just looked and I smiled and I said, good afternoon, gentlemen. Boy speaks, the attitude. This is to do with teaching, because you're teaching people like this, you know. I mean, they're all professors in it. So I got the job, and when I came out, I thought, you idiot, you've got the job.
And I take it you didn't write the reference for the other person, either.
Anyway, in teaching, I'd heard such bad stories about the people who were teaching me. Now when we're talking about teaching, we're talking about students, not just me. We're talking about the setup of an art school. And I had to give a talk to the students when I arrived. And, I said, well now look, you know, I introduced myself. I'm a new boy like 1/3 of you. You aren't a new course. And I said, no. As far as I can see, Ruskin is rather a dilapidated conservatory of the university, which is keeping it alive. And I said, and you will all have your gardeners in this conservatory potting you in plants, you know. And I said, I don't know how good they are, you know, I have no idea, which didn't cause a very big, happy response from the staff. But the students laughed, anyway. And so we started with that, and I said, now look, you're here not to learn to do kind of minimalism, pop art or anything, or even kind of old-fashioned things like I paint. You're here to create an art form. There is no point in selecting you as a group of people if you're just crazy, eccentric people sitting in the corner drawing mice or something. You know, we want students to talk, to invent something, you know, to create a new form. And I knew I was taking a bit of a risk because, you know, the general part of the university really would have liked the students to do topographical drawings of Oxford so that the dons could buy them cheaply. So, people were fighting against all sorts of things like that. And anyway, it worked. It worked incredibly well with the students. And whatever came up, I supported them with, you know. but I wasn't there a long time. It got on my nerves, and my ex-wife said, when she went to a special dinner that they all gave, and she talked to the Chancellor and all these people, and the principal of St Edmund Hall said to her, "I hope this doesn't stop you painting." So she said, "Oh, don't worry about that. If it does, you'll just leave." That is about it. That's about the thing.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? Anyone?
I'd just like to ask, if I may, you mentioned going back to the fresco paintings that you saw in Florence, at the Santa Maria Novella. Though you mentioned Massimo, which I thought was really interesting, because obviously everyone talks about Masaccio or Ghirlandaio or whatever, but not Massimo.
Well, he's more spiritual, probably, of the two, I think, and in a very curious way, he was trying to do Masaccio's style to fit in with the work. But I think on one side you've got the expulsion with Masaccio, and on the other side you have Adam and Eve. And the Marcelino is, for me, far more moving of the two, you know. And going all along those things, the control of putting things together. In a way, Masaccio was a social realist, wasn't he? Compared, you know.
And the colour, I thought, the colour.
Oh, yes.
When you talked about colour.
I miss all those things. Oh.
Thank you.
Sorry, did you have another question as well?
Yes, I was going to ask about what you think about current offerings for training as an artist. I was going to ask what you thought about the current situation regarding training for artists. What do you feel about drawing and painting being offered again as a route into art?
Well, perhaps the most diplomatic thing I can say is I retired a long time ago. I don't know. I mean, you know, yes, they're all young people doing what I did when I was young. I was doing the best I could with it. So you can't knock anybody in that sort of thing. But I don't go and look at it. I mean, when I can even look at a book with Marcelino and Masaccio in it, I don't need to get a bus to go anywhere.
Oh, there is one more question, perhaps, yes?
Do you think in some ways your personal work, the very detailed work, is a reaction to the set painting? Which is, it has by its very nature to be broad brushstroke.
Well, for me, right from the beginning, at 10 years old, I stumbled into this business with it actually making a big effect on me emotionally, and the same thing has stayed with me the whole of my life. I never got to doing just abstract paintings. My son Robert said once or twice, "You're getting very near to minimalism," which was true. I mean, but that was, I found the texture of just a sheet sufficient without crawling over a face or a landscape, you know, or just something hanging on the wall would do. So, no, I didn't realise actually till quite recently that I've been a subjective painter the whole of my life. But then, I mean, how could someone who started with no education do anything else but throw themselves into the fire, as it were, with what I was doing?
Yeah, you sense from the nature of your work, you can sense there's a commercial art background in it. I see that. I've
Oh,
from
yeah.
design and gone to painting. Well, the painting was always there from foundation, but painting's always been there from when I was a kid. But you just sense that way of representation and the objects that you take. I know you were saying about the intensity, and there's a spiritual element to that as well. But when I look at that, I can sense that commercial art.
Yeah,
Draftsmanship.
well, I can give a very simple answer to that. Nowadays, when I'm finding it difficult, I keep a kind of like, almost like a logbook, and if I'm getting very confused, I write things. I might write things horrible about somebody I know, or I might write about painting a picture in a different way. You know, I mean, it all just goes down on the sheet to me. But when I was a lad in commercial art, you were presented with a job sheet, which it was, and that's what we did. You know. And in a way, what's the difference in me writing a blog and going through it? I've got to start somewhere. I mean, I don't have any magic buttons to press to sort of wonderful things to happen.
Yeah, it's a brief of sorts, isn't it? Yeah.
You just do the best you could do. A lot of people are going to hate it.
It gives you a structure, just as you do in commercial art. Yeah.
Critics are probably the worst, I think. I mean, they really come out with some real marvels. I remember one being horrible, and he said to me, this was one of the Royal Academy banquets, he said, I remember your work of years ago that you did. I used to like it then. And I said, well, you're a painter, aren't you? Because I knew that. And he kind of winced, wondering what was going on. I said, you know, things just change, don't they? That was yesterday. You do what you do today. You don't have to be responsible for kind of develop. I mean, who can put down, like Mondrian could put down, like Braque could take on Cubism? Who can these days take on a formula to work to?
We have a request for one final question.
Your artistic talent is obviously innate. You've had no formal training apart from those 6 months at art school. Do you feel sometimes you missed out on, for example, I know in Ian's essay you were doing life studies at 13, but everyone was fully clothed because you weren't deemed old enough to see a naked body.
Well, no, because again, going back to the background, I mean, Johnny Minton used to say about Lucien Ford, he was the most unnatural artist that was working at the time. He had no natural talent to do things. But then 6 months later, Johnny is imitating Lucien. I mean, no, I don't. Anyway, I mean, the formal training is something people fight for. I think if you want formal, for me, if you want formal training, train yourself. Don't expect anybody to do it for you.
I think there are quite a number of people who've been to art college who feel that they've trained themselves in that. Yeah. Anyway, I think we're now well over the hour, and I think we better call that it. But thank you very much, David.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody.
I've had to do things before, and people from audiences were not always as kind.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for not disappointing me and for honouring my promise to you all that this afternoon was going to be entertaining, educational and inspirational. I hope you will all take some time to maybe go and have another look around the exhibition. Having heard what you've heard from David, it may give you a different perspective looking at some of those paintings now. But thank you so much, Ian. David, thank you. I hope that your visit back to Huddersfield will inspire you to go home and to paint something very special. And if you do, please send me a photograph of how Huddersfield inspired you. So thank you so much.